Gorpul lead the group to the northern edge of the accumulated territory. She led a host of 100 younger females, her sister Quietbite included. The 6 other tribal mothers remained back at Birmingham, feeling the main lines as their combined military prepared to engage. Gorpul tapped for everyone to remain steady. The host went still. She took the prepared coil and hook stick in her upper hands and then started swinging it in a circle. She launched it across the gap, the hook stick falling short. Quietbite tapped on the branch. Try again. Gorpul pulled it close and spun again. She launched it, missing. She repeated it several times, eventually landing the hook on the 7th try. She tapped the branch and 3 newly molted females stepped up. Gorpul pointed. Go, go, go! Tether off and we will be right behind you. The 3 young ones ran across, pulling thicker lines in a braid behind them. One of the tribe saw movement in the trees across the gap and tapped warning. Quietbite was at the front of the line, waiting, shaking in anticipation as the 3 females made their way across. I feel her. Single scout, Gorpul said quietly. She's not acting distressed. She doesn't know. Quietbite leaned close to her. They don't expect anything here. It is a good plan. Thank the humans when we return. Gorpul chittered lightly. We don't need overhangs anymore. Quietbite stilled her legs, shaking as she felt the 3 tether off. They're done! One at a time! Pull strands! She said as she started running. A pre-coiled line pulled tight as she made her way across. Gorpul followed, legs on the braided strand, left hand on her sister's weave. One after another, strand after strand was pulled tight across the gap. By the 20th crossing, a sturdy bridge was woven over the water between the opposing territories. Gorpul and Quietbite were already hunting the scout. The younger female was ducking through branch tunnels, trying to evade them in tight confines. Quietbite outpaced her on the outside and struck, punching through the leaves, branches, and string. The young female screamed as Quietbite's hand clasped around her upper right arm, squeezing. Carapace began cracking as the fingers tightened. Gorpul climbed over the woven tunnel and ripped it open, staring down with all 4 eyes on the young female. She lifted a finger as she tapped a toe. A female from the Wanderers, Death Soon, approached and stood behind the mother. She pulled a pin out from a plastic container and gently handed it to Gorpul. The mother took it and leaned over the struggling female. She jabbed the pin under a joint near her neck. She struggled for a few moments before going limp. Gorpul extended the needle back to Death Soon. Wrap her up. Tether her on our side. Keep the bridge guarded. She pivoted 2 eyes onto her sister. Get your 10 best, harry them. Be loud. Scare them to us. Quietbite stood taller, widening her eyes. Yes, my mother. She turned as she tapped her feet. In a moment her war party was beside her and they stormed out into the forest. Death Soon sealed off her pin, 2 eyes focused on Gorpul. These ones have too much pride. They will fall easily. Gorpul chittered. I do not blame them. 30 females would have been a large host before. Not now, not anymore. Death Soon looked down as 2 females were wrapping up the younger captive. She will need the antidote soon. Gorpul started walking, using human signs to move those nearby into positions. She will survive the day. If we hurry, we can capture them all before she never moves. Death Soon darkened her eyes. We will get her across. Be quick, and good luck, mother. Gorpul raised a hand up. Thank you, my daughter. Let none cross the bridge, and let no communications leak out. Death Soon gave her a human nod as she reached down and hefted the bound captive into her lower hands. The wandering will guard the path. A group of 30 men and women were listening at the stones beside the dock as Bubba sat and told them of the upcoming dilemma. So that's what our plan is. Put up some apartments here. One of the fishermen, Lincoln, raised his hand up and started talking. I like my house here. You can't just take it. I built it myself. He pointed over at a leaning structure of welded walls bound to the outer perimeter. I ain't built anything before. Bubba looked over at the house, nodding. He looked around at the other faces, all stern and staring back. You all don't want to go into the swamp, do you? Heads started shaking back and forth. He shut his eyes for a moment before looking up at the purple-hued sky. Look, there is nowhere I'd rather be than on my stead out there. He looked back toward the man. Lincoln, right? Lincoln nodded. Lincoln, I've done a bit of building before I got sent here. I worked lots of odd jobs. Maybe you haven't, I don't know your story. I get you're proud of your house, but you've learned a lot since you've built it, haven't you? Lincoln nodded. Yeah, I guess so. You've been doing well? You look fed? Lincoln smiled. Yeah, I got my own boat doing good. Bubba sighed. The off-worlders, they see me as a warden. I'm not your warden. I'm not trying to keep you here. He pointed across the water to the open swamp gate. I want us, people, out there, succeeding on this world. He lowered his hand. You, all of you, you're succeeding. Whatever you did that got you here, that's over. We, as a whole, have to succeed here. It's our last hope, our home here. Bubba looked around, meeting faces. I've made my home in the swamp, and it's not bad at all. I'm here to help, teach what I can. He smiled. I doubt I have to teach any of you much. You're all adept here, but we need room for more people coming. That's the gist of it. You have skills already, please. Let's put them to use. Jacob stepped up with Michael beside him. He raised his hand up. You said we get first pick of the dropships? Bubba nodded. Yes. They're going to be overbuilt as much as possible, give us metals we don't have here. Lincoln's eyes widened. Aluminum? Bubba nodded. Jacob stepped over to the younger man and patted him on the back. You've been wanting a shielded shop to rework engines in. There you go. Lincoln smiled. All right. He looked around. We're in this together. Bubba laughed as others joined in. Michael walked over and fist bumped him. Bubba took him in a half hug. I was worried sick telling y'all. Michael leaned into him. There's a copse I've been looking at for a while, shallow water. Make a standing house like yours, you know? Bubba relaxed slightly. Good. Good. We've all been cramped here anyway, wishing for better. Hell, we go out fishing all day to get away from seeing all these same people. This is good bubs. I hope so, Bubba replied. This new bunch of people, there's no telling who they're going to be. Michael patted him and looked around. Like the last bunch of people, and the batch before that. Sad thing is, we're going to have to keep doing this, you know? Bubba's mind wandered for a moment. They're just going to keep dumping people here. Yep, probably even after we're gone. Bubba groaned. I don't want this to be just a prison. We're people, you know. It ain't right, just dumping us like this. Jacob stepped closer, hearing him. We're right here with you on it. It's our home, too. He turned and looked out at the crowd as people closed in. So, if we're going to do this, how about we do this as a community? A woman shouted. Hell yes! Barn raisings! Jacobs pointed at her and touched his nose. Let's get a list of names. We all work together on this. We can get houses up quicker, learn quicker, am I right? Several men cheered. Bubba patted him on the back. You offering to take point? Jacobs nodded and brushed his hair aside. Hell yeah, he leaned in with a whisper. Get me up the list quicker that way. Bubba groaned and took a step back, watching as the line formed to get on the settlement list. People were already discussing skills and forming groups. Scott had been hiding out on the roof of the block, making a small lean-to next to an air filtration unit. Death soon had helped him weave the boards together and made him a hammock. He snuck around town at night, sleeping during the days and waking when she came around. He was getting around as the sun was setting, hanging out near the edge of the building, watching as Bubba was giving a speech down the road. Scott turned around as he heard the loud thrum of movement on the anchor line tethered near him. He looked around and saw a xenoarch moving across the line toward him. He lifted his hand up. She lifted hers up in greeting, giving him the peace sign he had taught her. He smiled, and then noticed she was carrying a large woven lump in her lower arms. What is that? She looked at him, not understanding. She chittered as she moved past him, tapping him on the shoulder. Scott watched as she moved across the roof to his lean-to. He walked up beside her. That's someone else. He looked her in the eyes. Why they bound up? What are you doing? Death soon plopped the incapacitated female on the ground and looked back at the lines woven over the roads. Scott matched her gaze and noticed several other large females bringing more incapacitated their way. "Who are they? Are you going to eat them?" One of the females, carrying 2 woven bodies in her lower arms, stepped across the roof towards him. She had a large rectangle hanging from her neck. "You are the old mayor," it translated after she spat several consonants out at him. He nodded slowly, looking around at the accumulating females. "Yes, what is happening?" The female listened for a moment and replied, "You are to help us." He took a step back, looking at Death soon. "Tell me what is going on first." "Who are they?" he asked, pointing at the pile of knocked-out spiders. Death soon stepped closer to him, touching his pants. He knocked her hand down. "What are you doing?" "No." He looked back at the larger female with the translator. "I don't want to eat them. I don't cook." The female stretched her head up taller. "You are to get us the human yellow fruit." Scott looked around for a moment. "Yellow fruit?" She darkened her eyes a moment. "Name is hard to say. Lumen? Lumen?" She stressed out the vowels as she attempted to say the human word. "Yellow fruit. We need it. It grows in this building. You can get it for us." Scott laughed. "You want me to get you lemons?" Death soon chittered and reached again to touch him. He took her hand and held it firmly. "Later." He looked at the tall one with the translator. I don't have any money. I'm kind of in a bad way lately, you know?" The female motioned for another to come closer. The other had similar stripping to the mother and walked up to Scott. It held out a bag of mother-of-pearl coins. He rifled through it, counting. "Oh, wow, you girls are rolling in it." He looked up at the mother, smiling. She stared at him with all 4 eyes. "Yellow fruit," she said, the translator humanizing her words. Scott Thompson nodded. Yeah, lemons." He looked at Death soon and gave her a wink. "I'll be right back, Shug." He lifted a hand up, waving towards them as he started backing away. I can have some of this, right?" "Get us lemons. Use the rest how you wish to use it," the mother replied. He laughed and started toward the rope ladder. He made sure it was still attached to a large pipe and threw it over the edge. He stretched a leg out, finding a rung, and started down. He paused as his head was just to pass under the edge and looked at them. All of their eyes were focused intently on his. God, they're weird. He smiled to himself and continued down the ladder. Scott walked through the white hall, a light flickering as another magnetic wave surged outside. He passed by an open door, looking in as he went by. 2 men and a woman were inside working a series of looms and string extruders. A man looked out at him, giving him a wave. He smiled and waved back. "Howdy, neighbors." The woman bobbed her head. "Hey, Thompson." He struggled for a moment trying to remember their names as he walked on. He shook his head as they escaped him, his hand finding the sack of coins at his hip. He continued through the building until he reached the greenhouses. He stepped through the door, instantly hit by a rush of warm, moist air. The operator heard the bell of the door and walked towards him. "Oh, hey, how you been, Scott?" "Hey, Philip." He looked around at the foliage. "You in charge around here?" Philip nodded. "Yeah, took over last month. Bought it out." Scott nodded back at him. "Things always changing, you know?" Philip nodded again, rolling his eyes. "Yep. So, you need something?" Yeah, you got any lemons ripe?" Philip laughed. "Got 3 trees in the South Edition. I was actually procrastinating harvesting them." "How much for 'em? How many you want?" Scott opened the bag up and pulled out a fistful of coins. 50 clams worth? Shit, bud. You help me harvest 'em all down, I'll give you 100 for that. 100? Yeah? You wanting to haggle more? Philip asked. Nah. That should be good. Should be? Philip laughed. You making cakes for everyone? Maybe some lemon wine? He pointed back towards a storage room. I've been harvesting cane pretty regularly. Could sell you some. Make something pretty stout. Scott shook his head. No. We got enough drunks around here as it is. He pointed back towards the tree room. I just need the lemons. Project I'm working on. Project? Philip chuckled. I didn't have you pegged as a man of science. He shrugged and started walking. Guess we all need hobbies, growth, and all that. Scott smiled. Yeah, branching out, new things. Dahlia stepped into the main corridor, walking while looking at her slate. She paused as she looked over the schematic. Fucking hell. She turned back around and stepped into a body. The person fell, dropping what they were carrying as well as knocking her slate to the ground. Shit! She shouted, realizing what was happening. She sighed and stared down at the former mayor recovering on the floor. Watch where you're going, Thompson. He glared up at her and started gathering his lemons back into the large sack. You're the one not looking where you're going. He focused on his hands. Why are you even still here? Your survey should have finished up by now. She knelt down and picked up her slate. Opportunity abounds here. She looked around at the lemons as he gathered them up. What are you up to? He paused, looking at her. Baking. Bullshit. Yeah, I'm making cakes. Good graces and all that. She stood up again, still staring at him as he kept filling the bag up with the fruit. I heard you'd been playing around with one of them. She watched him a moment more. Getting them high now, too? He paused and looked at her. High? She nodded, gesturing at the bag on his hip. That's their silk, I recognize it well enough. They have you come in here buying those? What do you mean, getting high? The acidic compounds in lemons and the high vitamin C jack up their neural pathways. It makes them hallucinate pretty strongly. Scott gathered the bag up in his arms and stood up. He paused and looked at her. They trip on these? She nodded and put a hand up. They do good by me. I don't care what you're up to. Just be careful with them. They're pretty strong. He nodded quickly at her and started down the corridor. She watched him for a moment, shrugging, and started back toward Wirt's lab. A loop of cordage was waiting for him at the ladder. He tied the bag in it and started up. The bag of lemons made it to the top before him. He crested the lip of the roof and pulled his body over. He paused, watching as one of the females walked the bag over to one of the bound Xenos. Still watching, his hands found the ladder rungs and pulled it up. The taller mother with the translator used a weave of cloth in her hand to pick out one of the fruits with her upper right hand. She took a human blade in the other hand and stood over the knocked-out spider. Her lower hand put something in the incapacitated one's mouth, and instantly it began moving. The strands around it held fast as it struggled. It shouted and stopped, staring up at the mother. 4 eyes met and locked with 4 eyes. She shrunk down, her eyes darkening. The mother put the blade into the lemon, slowly slicing it, turning it in the flesh. A dribble of fluid dripped down on the bound one's face. She turned as the drips hit her eyes, squirming. Her mandibles flicked back and forth, trying to keep the fluid out of her mouth. She fought for several seconds before going catatonic again. Scott walked over, edging near the periphery of the watching females. He looked up at Deathsoon and pointed at the captive. What are you doing to her? The mother listened to his words play quietly on the rectangle. She turned towards him, the knife pointed down at the twitching xenoarch. We are doing the science, learning your magic. Scott looked around at the dozens of eyes now focusing on him. My magic? I'm just living up here. He looked back at Deathsoon. Tell them, you and me. Mother Gorpol looked over at the Wanderer as she increased the volume on the rectangle. You and him? You claim him as your male? Deathsoon stood taller, stretching her torso up. He is mine. He submits to me. Gorpol looked around with 3 eyes, one still focused on Deathsoon. Another female stepped up, striped as a Wanderer. She tends to the male here. I have seen her. She will not share the sweet with her sisters. Gorpol took a step closer to Deathsoon. Quietbite matched a pace behind. We know what your clan has gone through, but do not let that cause you to stop being sisters. Share what food your male brings, share his work. That binds us all together. Deathsoon spoke, the rectangle translating her words as Scott listened. It, he, his, sweet. They make it. Make it? Gorpol chittered. They make all sorts, cook many ovens. You have new meat. Deathsoon rumbled slightly. Her hand found the pouch on her chest and extended outward toward the larger mother. Taste it. Gorpul looked into the bag with her forward eyes. She leaned over, dipping one of her larger hand's fingers inside. She pulled it out, covered in a film. She touched it to her mandibles, tasting it. Odd, she said. Scott grimaced slightly. Gorpul looked over at him. It has a unique flavor. It is enjoyable, she pointed at him. You will make more of this for us. He shook his head and looked at Death Soon. I don't think you understand. I do that with her. Death Soon raised a hand up and motioned to the mother. Gorpul is right. I have been greedy, human Scott. She stressed his name. Let her taste what you make. Scott looked around as they all stared at him. You want me to do that right now? Death Soon darkened her eyes and took a step closer to him. Two of her eyes pivoted up to the mother. He protests if I make him do it himself. Do not shame me. You have tasted it. It is worth the trouble. The tall women watched as Death Soon gave them instruction on human clothing removal and took off his pants. Scott's nerves gave way as her hand found him and he started to relax.